and build the capacity of the citizen. And for this participation on open government partnership, I mean, it would go a long way, I mean, regarding this citizen-led, I mean, accountability. Next, vulnerability mapping and identification of special needs of vulnerable group is crucial for achieving goal 16. And finally, countries in conflict have different problems, I mean, compared to other countries. And these countries needs to be dealt, I mean, differently. I mean, for these countries, maybe 60% of their budget directly goes to the security issues. So you have to, I mean, look from that perspective also. Okay, I would like to stop over here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are behind schedule, but we haven't reached the crisis point as yet. And if two of the panelists take 7 minutes each, we'll still have time, 10 minutes for discussion and for the final word from the chairperson. May I now request Dr. Devopriyo Bhattacharya, his distinguished fellow at the Center for Policy Dialogue, Dhaka. You can comment, or you may comment on all the SDGs or choose to comment on a few of them and leave something for Dr. Jain.
Indeed, I was not planning to comment on any of them. I may say something different on that. Madam Chair, respected moderator, colleague on the table, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. You know, it has been an extraordinary day with a fantastic opening and listening to the government officials about the respective country, and then this breakout groups, and finally this feedback session. It's really, really overwhelming. And I stand here at this moment feeling very weak in my knees. Sun is going down, and my ideas are a bit confused. And I'll have to do the same tomorrow again like this. So you see, in my next opportunity, when Nagesh, my good friend, and Shachin, my other good friend, come to Dhaka, I'll make them work very squarely, like they're making me work here. Well, that's what you do to your brothers, eh? I'm very pleased that I'm here and listen to all of them very carefully. In one of my earlier incarnation as the Bangladesh ambassador in Geneva, we used to, in these circumstances, wait for the chair reminding us, the interpreters are leaving, so you better stop. You know, this is a very common standard procedure of SPOG. Mr. Moderator, you don't have that advantage at this moment. The British colonial rule has created a new enabling environment for us on that. Thank you. Let me be very brief. You know, this first issue, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 SDGs have been picked up. And under every HLPF, UN's Secretariat has picked up 5 for discussion at the HLPF and its reflection on the subsequent ANGA, the UN General Assembly. Who does it? How do they do it? What is the logic that these 5 and not any other 5 over there, you see? For a very integrated, holistic, system-wide approach, an agenda, this arbitrary selection of SDGs under different HLPF is very, very questionable. And I'm just 72 hours back from in New York, trying to plan for the upcoming HLPF 2019, which will be at the summit level. The 4 years, you know, assessment will be done. And all of us where we are questioning how exactly we are going to position ourselves in 2019 with all these things over there. So my first point is that we will get it all wrong, that if you just pick up 5 and don't speak about the other 12. And that point has been made by my colleagues over here. And so the issue is, when we talk about climate change, why won't we talk about sustainable production and consumption? They are so interlinked. And why SDG 16 should not be there in every HLPF, as my good friend Posh has mentioned. So you see, there is, I do not find them pattern in this madness at this moment over there. I leave it to Nagesh to sort it out with his headquarters. And Sachin may give some of the explanations. But let me come up with the framework within against which you really assess all these contributions which have come from the floor, and so rich. You know, I wouldn't use the word interesting. In Geneva, the word, when you say it was an interesting presentation, you mean that you haven't learned anything. It was really an interesting and informative presentation. Colleagues, may I request you to give a big hand to these breakout groups over there, with the permission of the chair. Now, what is the framework against which we can consider all these inputs which have come from the floor? My first point is that it is an universal agenda. It's for everybody. It is relevant to every country and every citizen. But we will not forget the priorities or the contextual realities over there. Now, did the presentations coming from the floor reflect that universalism or regionalism in this context with specific contextual highlights? I think they did. I think they did, and they did summarize certain common issues which have come through and which are available in most of the countries, and they did highlight some of the solutions in this regard. But my problem was there a regional set of indicators which may be pursued based on this particular regional commonality which has been highlighted in the presentation? So, say for example on the climate change, or for example on trafficking, which has been mentioned in the morning, will there be a common set of indicators which can be, where the collective strength can be put in place and could be done? The second issue which will be coming up very strongly is that the integration issue. You know, the colleagues, because since they are in, this is a comprehensive, holistic one, different from the MDGs, they are interlinked. Interconnectivity is so important. And I'm so happy that my colleagues have highlighted those interlinkages very strongly. You know, it was mentioned, my good friend Mustafiz mentioned in case of inequality, Posh mentioned in case of 16 on the rights issue, and many others, education coming up on also over there on employability on group SDG 8. So I think the interlinkages issue is something, one of the, you know, value or the added, you know, dimension of the SDGs, which we always should keep in mind and not take the silo approach as it was in case of MDGs, as we have seen. The other issue which distinguishes SDGs from many others is the so-called LNOB, leave no one behind. Did my colleagues highlight that? Because SDGs are supposed to, one of the value of SDGs is to take a disaggregated look at the people who have been left behind. It is not about averages as it was in case of MDGs. So did my colleagues take a look at disaggregated way? They did. You know, when they talked about inequality, about productive employment, that they mentioned the youth, unemployed, rural. I think that was the LNOB, the left behind group, what we have been identifying. There were also others which have been mentioned in the process. And so what I will urge upon you to keep that disaggregated look whenever we prepare this kind of position papers or approaches or in solutions over there. The other concern, the final one, was that whether there was any reflection of the systemic concerns. I think the inequality issues have brought in, climate change have brought in, that at the end of the day, SDG is a global partnership. No wonder it is a global partnership, and the global partnership is there because we want to deal with the systemic concern, the lack of global governance in sometimes, the governance deficit, and also the institutional fault lines which are there still affecting our efforts for development. So I think the systemic concerns issues will finally be there. Last not but the least, which made, you know, the means of implementation, the MOIs, were one of the, you know, added value of the SDGs vis-a-vis the MDGs. Did the colleagues mention this? I think they did it extensively. They have given us enough solutions in terms of solving many of these problems and how do they come forward. So just to conclude, you see, the framework I am using to assess these feedbacks is the SDG framework, the principles or the assumptions or the premises on the basis of which the SDGs were created. And I think the colleagues have done excellent on that. Where I see the problem over here, I will come to the, where I see the problem over here, we are still in the country framework mindset. You know, having a framework, of regional framework, fitting all these things over there and thinking regionally, that is what is missing as of today, after 3 years of SDGs in the region. Why they are missing on that? I think the challenges were very well said. Since it's a sundown, let me just keep it to my grandmother's principle. My grandmother told me that, son, whenever they invite you to Delhi, never say more than 3 points at the end, because they will never remember the 4th one. They're all tired by that time. So my 3 points is, number 1 is that there is no political traction at this moment. Let's be very honest on that. There is no political traction to create a regional framework at this very moment. This is a major issue. You'll have to come tomorrow to discuss these things. The second one, we do not have adequate information also to deal with it. Data is a serious issue. Information flow is a serious issue. And last but not the least, we have not been able to create, in the absence of the paralysis of the intergovernmental framework, SARC in particular, alternative institutional platforms, as of today, to take these issues forward. The Asia-Pacific Sustainable Development Forum somehow fills in that lacuna certain ways. But we will have to take it forward much more strongly if we really believe a prosperous South Asia, which has been mentioned in the morning. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya. When I requested you to talk about all the SDGs, this is exactly what I thought you would be doing, you know, taking an overall view of the, you know, approach of the HLPF in the context of the present challenges of sustainability that we face. And I'm very happy that you have commented on the broad trend of the discussion without just telling them that they are very interesting. No, I'm so happy about that. May I now request Dr. Jain, Ashok Jain, to make the presentation.
Madam Chair, Ms. Reena Roy, other dignitaries on the dais and the friends. In fact, after Mr. Bhattacharya spoke, I find my job is a little more difficult. In fact, the 5 SDGs which we have discussed in the morning, and the discussions have gone quite interesting, particularly keeping in view the issues in the South Asia region. In fact, we see that virtually the issues are common, virtually common for all our countries. It's be education, it is inequality, it is on peace and justice, it's on the climate or similar issues. So what Mr. Bhattacharya was also mentioning, and majority of you have said in the groups, that I think there is an extremely urgent need for our regional cooperation, learning from each other, sharing the best practices, because each country is doing something good in some area, and how do we learn from them, because our problems are common. It is not that we learn something in Washington or New York and implement in India or Bhutan or in Pakistan or Afghanistan. It is basically we neighboring countries having the similar issues, similar problems, and to some extent our similar culture. Probably our learning from each other would be much more important and much more useful to all of us. Like Mr. Sonam was mentioning that there was no rapporteur for him, so I thought little bit a job of rapporteur I can do for him. And I will a little bit of concentrate a little more on SDG 13 and particularly some of the issues how we have been tackling them in India, and probably we also learn from each other. Like our friend from the Bhutan was mentioning in the morning that
Bhutan is carbon negative, and they have promised that they will remain to be carbon negative, and more than 60% of their area is the forest area. But still those climatic issues remain there because of some issues in the neighbors, like our friend was mentioning that burning of those agriculture residue, creates a lot of problems, not only within the country, but among the neighbors also, and which we are facing in sometimes in Delhi also during the winters when a lot of this rice, stubs are burnt in our neighboring states. Now, one more important issue which has come up, and I personally feel, because I was dealing the SDG in Niti Aayog about a month back, and I've been to my state, so I am of the firm opinion that though there are 169 targets or 17 goals, but there is an urgent need to all of us that as per our requirement of the countries, whichever we feel the important, that some of the few indicators, like in case of India, we have selected around 75 indicators, which we shall regularly monitor at the national and subnational levels, so that the states or the subnational levels will know that how they are performing, what was their performance during 2018, how they are performed during 2019, and how they are going to perform. And then they can learn from each other. If A state has done better, then why B not? And it also, what we have seen in Niti Aayog, that we have developed the index for the water, for education, for health, to bring some kind of a very positive and competitive, a good positive competition among them, so that they compete with each other to do better. And similarly in the SDGs, in fact, we are at almost at the final stage, and maybe as Sayukta was mentioning about after a month or so, that this SDG index of the country for various subnational levels will be released. That's one thing very, very important. Second important thing which we have done with the UN was that we are creating a SDG dashboard, and this is also almost at the final stage. The whole idea then the SDG dashboard, not only the national level, the data will be there, and which will link to the various websites of the various programs, but the states are also being given the authority that they shall also feed their data, and the state governments can compare if Gujarat, how Gujarat and how the Maharashtra are performing, how Haryana is with reference to Gujarat, how Jammu and Kashmir is with reference to Uttarakhand, and so on. And the whole information would be available on the dashboard, and then they can go to those states and learn from them that how they have tackled that particular issue with the similar conditions and similar kind of a geography. So these are something very, very important we are doing on that, and probably this will go a long way. Now coming specifically to, as I was mentioning of the SDG 13, that some of the, the recent development which the government of India has done, that like the Vice Chairman Niti Aayog was mentioning, that we have decided about 175 gigawatts of the renewable energy. Out of the 100 gigawatts come from the solar, and 50 gigawatts or 60 gigawatts come from wind and the biomass, etc., etc. Another very important things which have been taken into consideration is that 40% of our population which use the biomass as the fuel for cooking the food. So under a program, a very important program has been launched, because why I'm mentioning, but this could be a cross-learning from each other, that supplying the LPG gas connections to particularly the poor families, and the target which was put about 50 million, and connections, and 41 millions have been provided, and now the target has been announced to about 80 million gas connections. The whole idea is that it will help not only to clean the environment, or carbon footprint, but it will also improve the health of the women, which otherwise are engaged in mostly the cooking or the food in their kitchen. So their health will get improved, because all the SDGs are so interlinked to each other, that as our friend just now mentioned, that if we are able to achieve the SDG 16, it is not an SDG, but